My folks will get started in just a moment. Okay, remote folks, can you hear us?
Yes, we can. Can you hear us?
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. I trust everyone had wonderful, if somewhat pricey dinners. You had good conversations, and you've come ready to make proposals to resolve all of our issues. Yeah.
I expected you guys to solve everything last night.
It's all reasonable expectation, right? Yeah.
The trick is drinking enough to solve everything. It's not so much what you forget.
So yeah, as we said, if you can try to sit next to new people, mix things up a little bit today. We're going to go ahead and get started as people get settled. We need a scribe for this morning's session, at least one. Do we have any volunteers?
June, you were pretty good last time.
That deer in the headlight, no, yes. Any volunteers for scribe?
I move we ask Gemini to do it.
I can do some from here.
Oh, thank you, Elliot.
Elliot's awesome.
You know, Elliot, if you're willing to scribe, we can get you a seat in the room.
It's okay. What I was going to say though, while I have the floor, is if anybody needs help with like a restaurant reservation this evening, I can't get a large group, but I can give you some suggestions for places in Zurich because I'm a local. So just text me separately on this, okay?
So we have a local concierge. Fantastic.
And I have mentioned it to a few people here, Elliot. Thank you.
And we'd like people to A/B test Elliot against various AI assistants.
Or just against random, which might be the same.
And Gary. And Gary, yes, actually. All right. So Elliot's going to scribe. If folks could help Elliot out with the scribing, that would be very helpful. Again, the quality of the minutes does improve when we have more than one set of eyes on it. So yesterday afternoon, we were talking at the end about the so-called top-level preference, and we had a couple of polls at the end of the day where we were trying to figure out if we were leaning one way or another. They were pretty inconclusive. Hello, please join us. They were pretty inconclusive. They were inclusive too.
They were inclusive.
Huh.
Why so odd?
So I was thinking about this last night and trying to figure out how we can move this discussion forward a little bit. I put up on the whiteboard the start of what I heard in the arguments, both for and against including a top-level preference term in the vocabulary. And what we heard was that, the people who seem to be for it, and then please, if I'm misrepresenting or leaving things out, let's have the discussion, let's get more bullet points on the list. But the argument for seemed to be that it's valid for people to be able to express this, that they want to opt out of this, and that it having a top-level preference kind of accommodates being able to prevent against unknown uses or rapid change, so that people didn't have to play whack-a-mole effectively with their preferences. And the biggest argument I heard against top-level, and I know there are others, and so that's why I want to get them out on the whiteboard, is this notion of unintended consequences, that because it's poorly defined or amorphous and very broad, that it might not do what people think it does when they express this preference, where it may be likely that it doesn't do what they think it does when they express this preference. And this goes back to the discussion that we're having, and Ecker was expressing that, we need to have preferences with reasonable fidelity to people's expectations. Are there any, if we can just focus on getting kind of crisp, high-level categories, are there any more arguments both for and against that top-level preference that people have in mind? And let's get the microphones out. Oh, they're out.
Yeah, I put them on up.
Great, thanks.
So I thought I heard another argument, which I'm not endorsing, but I'm just trying to get out,
Yep, that's fine.
which is, I think a very unintended consequence, but not the same thing, which is that if we allow people and encourage them to say, I don't support anything, then it inhibits new innovation of all kinds.
Right. So it inhibits innovation.
Yeah. And I think, at some point I want to try to flesh out the unintended consequences, because I think, obviously I'm concerned about this, but when I was arguing about it, what I was trying to say was that the rest of the vocabulary has to be sufficiently rich that you're not stuck in a position where the only thing you can say is no, no, no.
Right.
And so if, I agree, I am most worried about the unintended consequences if we're convinced the rest of the vocabulary is sufficiently rich. But others may have other things I want to say about that. Sure.
And to be clear, the purpose of getting these lists done is to try and figure out, okay, well, can we mitigate some of these concerns on either side and get to a place where we can make forward progress? And that sounds like you're proposing a potential mitigation for that one. Can you manage the queue, Suresh? Thank you. So again, we're using MeetEcho for queuing.
So one argument that came up in favor was standardization, that people are expressing this preference, but if it's not in the vocabulary, then people will have to look different places.
Right. So completeness, shipping a complete standard. Yeah. Yeah. Let's take vocabulary.
No,
And I want to add maybe an against argument that I think didn't come up is that adding, I don't know if it fits because it's against sort of text data mining in particular, not the concept of a top level category, so I don't know if that's helpful at this point.
Gentlemen, sorry, we need to have one conversation. There are microphones and remote. Thanks.
So I can also park that until later.
Okay. Keep that in mind.
Yeah, I think we should mention that it would having a top level would potentially align with existing regulation. So we have to be aware that if we skip that, the creative communities will come up with other solutions that address this point. So it has to be pretty clear to everyone, and I don't think that this would be beneficial to the entire approach.
Give us 30 seconds of what those other regulations
On the mic, or you can repeat the question that got asked to you.
No, I'm not saying that there will be other regulation, but there will be ways to express reservations on that level according to existing regulation, at least for creators and rights holders that are based in the EU. They will have to come up with something to address that.
Yeah, probably.
My question to you is, what are the existing regulations you have in mind?
Okay, Paul.
I mainly want to also to make a point about the completeness of the vocabulary, but I also want to point out that I find a bit of a tension between the fact that we yesterday heard, for example, and I think it was Ecker mainly saying we need to be we need to identify what creators really want or what rights holders really want. And the fact that we had someone in the room, Brad, who's not here yesterday, clearly expressed that this is, and I'm hearing that from many, many others also, this is a preference that people want to express. And I'm a little bit worried about the unintended consequences, right? If we are building a vocabulary, and we need to assume that people are sort of free to make choices, to express them, and that by definition, these are valid choices. If we are not doing that, we need to build something else. We're enabling people to express their preference. And so by definition, anything they can articulate that fits within our charters should probably be treated as a valid preference signal by this group.
Let's not go too deep into arguing the individual items yet. Let's try to fill out the board first. But I'm gonna add that to here and say it's valid to express and there is demand for it as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's me. So Suresh. So for me, the biggest thing I have for having the thing is that it allows people to express stuff easily for both opt-in and opt-out regimes. So imagine you're somebody who's expressing preferences and you want to do this for both opt-in and opt-out regimes, like, having one top level thing to change it and then like either do the permissions or not. Either you want to turn it things on or off, makes it easier for you. And I think that was something that we kind of explored in the workshop that people wanted to do, like, say like, hey, I want to allow all these things, and if you're in a opt-in regime, right? Like, kind of like you're opted into all the other things that you're not doing it. So that you would turn off the whole thing and then either like turn on digital things or vice versa.
Oh, my computer wants to sleep, sorry.
Okay, now my against point does fit kind of where the discussion is going, because I think when we're talking about the alignment with regulation, we also have to be aware that a preference saying I don't want any use or I don't want text and data mining isn't actually the same as what the regulation allows. Like, the regulation allows rights holders to opt out of acts of reproduction, so acts of copying that aren't purely temporary, that are required for text and data mining, which is not the same as opting out of text and data mining. So for example, the one of the technical problems that came up in the discussion that, oh, if you opt out of all text and data mining, you can't even look at the robots.txt to find out whether you're allowed to crawl. That is true if it's an opt-out of all text and data mining. That is not true if it's an opt-out of the copyright exception that you wouldn't need to look at the robots.txt file. So I think we're also a little bit lying to ourselves if we're saying just adding this top level category to the vocabulary without adding all of the specificities of copyright and what you need permission for in the first place, that is somehow equivalent, because it's not equivalent.
Right. So how can I put that in a pithy way on the board? Misalignment regulation?
Misalignment with the regulation, yes.
I heard about.
I'm looking for the, but I'm not. Chris, go for it.
Yeah, so another reason for having a top level category is that it enables the emergence of a marketplace between content creators and AI consumers. Because anybody who's expressing such an opt-out would then, it would then enable sort of bilateral negotiations that happen over the use of the content. Whether that's a desirable property of any sort of outcome that we get to through the standards process.
So promotes marketplace?
Promotes marketplace, yeah.
Didn't I use remote today?
So I think.
Give me a second, we'll mute here and then you can go. Irina? Is there a microphone down that end?
Yeah. Martin, can you?
I think something that was repeated yesterday a few times was the focus on technology rather than focusing on the use case. That is also like easy to translate to like content owners and right holders. So I think the challenge with like being technology centric, it's twofold. So one is not focus on the purpose, and the second one is like it is really hard for like this group to sort of like draw the lines between those high level categories in a way that tie appropriately to the purpose that is perceived, I guess, by the people who are trying to set up these preferences.
So that sounds like a criticism of the current top level. I mean, one could imagine we could come up with a top level that was purpose oriented rather than technology oriented, right?
Right. Yeah, I was making an assumption here. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, it's I guess against the top level because if you have like the granularity, then it's really easy for you to sort of like be very specific and putting things under an umbrella is really hard. And currently, the umbrellas are technology specific.
Right. I'm just trying to decide how to get this on the board and whether this is orthogonal to the top level issue or not. But I hear you. I think that's important to discuss at some point. Paul wants to interject.
From the editorial perspective, I think it is very helpful for us to keep it about like the question on the board against for top level and not dive into what the top level says. Like I think we need to work on the draft.
Right.
Like
We can do that.
It's we need to get the structure first.
Right.
And then it's a subsequent thing to
Right.
define the categories. So like I think that also points a little bit to Felix's last comment.
Right. And I think that's, for me, I want to come out of this discussion with a sense of, are we going to attempt to incorporate a top level or not? And if so, what issues do we need to address? And I think that's one of the issues that we would need to address, which is, that's a little orthogonal to the decision we're making right now. But let's please remember that. Thank you. We will make sure we keep that statement sometime. Paul, you were next. Was that what you wanted?
Yeah, that was wrong.
Okay, good.
Yeah, Aaron, like, you can try again.
Aaron, try again.
Oh, am I there?
You are there.
Okay, sorry about that. I wanted to respond to a couple points, and I put them in the chat, but regardless of the scope of an opt-out, a licensing market can emerge for those uses if they are prohibited by rights holders ex ante and need to be negotiated for to unblock. So I don't think that that's a particular argument for the scope of a particular opt-out as much as it is a supporting argument for having some opt-outs properly scoped. And the Article 4 ECD or DSM says that opt-outs, that reservations of rights against TDM appropriately expressed have to be followed in certain circumstances, but it doesn't say that there has to be one singular opt-out to govern all TDM. And if this group decides that it's more appropriate to divide up the TDM world into various buckets, then that can be part of the appropriate expression of those reservations of rights. So I just wanted to push back on that point as well. Thank you.
What are we trying to define? Is it that top level catch-all? Because I don't think if you're trying to express a TDM opt-out, it necessarily covers catch-all, because I think some of the definitions we're looking to define as well potentially go further than what is in the regulation, which is really directed to storage. So I think actually defining what we mean by a text of data mining opt-out, if we want something that complies with the regulation, is actually quite important before we think about, is that a top level definition?
Okay. Mike, go.
I'll pass one.
Thank you.
Hey, sorry, just to
add maybe to Aaron's comment that if we would expect all or almost all people who wanted to take a top level opt out to then go ahead and opt search or some properly scoped search function back in, then it's not true that there's a huge amount of demand for a top level opt out, right? There's an equal amount of demand for two separate things that would be useful. And I mean, without making a prediction, so if 99% of people who would use the top level domain would then say no to top level processing, but yes to search, that's an argument to separate them and to avoid confusion or, so I'm not sure how that fits in your for or against arguments, but it does problematize some of the for arguments so far. I think it's the demand part of valid to express plus demand.
But yeah, that's percent. And to be clear, just because it's on this list doesn't mean that we're accepting this as a ground fact. We're just trying to get along. Felix.
I guess this point depends a little bit on what the category would be. Like Sonia said, like if there is a text and data mining category that isn't necessarily thought of as a top level category, or if the top level category was much less broad than what we had so far. But with all the top level categories we've discussed so far, I would add something like misalignment with the charter, because they all include a lot of things that are actually not AI. So there's kind of the question of, do we have the right people in the room for discussing things that are AI unrelated?
That's a issue that doesn't just affect this, but it does affect this. I think you're right. So that's cuts both ways. Yeah, it does. So believing in non-AI, yeah. I think that's an issue just we have to manage overall. I'll put it here.
Who's got another?
Who's got a mic?
So when you're doing that, I think it's probably worth recognizing that some of these are non-arguments, and we'll need to work through that. And you almost need a little marker saying, yes, this is an argument that we've heard in favor of this, but we've also heard it in favor of the other alternative side of things. And so we're going to explicitly discount that question. I think I found Aaron's argument about the market thing, to me, convincing. And that says that no matter what set of categories we come up with, the market will be able to use those to affect certain outcomes, as long as they cover uses that are considered valuable. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it has a top level point to Caleb's one. I think it's probably worth going through each of these and having that discussion. I noticed that Eric put on the chat the sort of discussion of demand, and I think we probably need to examine the demand one a little bit more closely. I think sure.
I'm not hearing a lot of new ones that I'm not seeing anything, so we can start going into discussing them individually. But if people have other things, please bring them over. I think we're at Kevin.
Maybe let's. Joyce has got one over there. Okay, easier then.
This is mine now.
Yeah.
I asked this question in chat, but I'm having trouble thinking of a situation where you would want to prohibit all text and data mining or all automated processing, or however we scope that top level category, but you wouldn't want to use traffic control mechanisms as opposed to preference signal mechanisms to just disallow traffic from automated clients. Anybody have good examples of things that fit in that gap?
I have one. So one that I can think of is that people who use that opt out of everything then want to selectively opt back into certain things. So for example, search. And if you say don't crawl, then you can't do that.
That's the only thing.
That's at the higher.
Okay. Sonia?
So I think Just adding to the list against, two things I think are related. So one is technical feasibility. Like what do we actually mean by such a TDM exception, if that's what we're trying to define? And the other is lack of consistency in application because of it being such a impossibility to actually try to implement it to the letter. How will it be implemented?
So, uncertainties in the implementation, perhaps?
Yeah, I'd say lack of consistency across how it's understood.
Okay.
We like to keep it in its market.
Sorry?
So, like, we get people in those markets, for the top level,
Consistent.
society is.
We'll kind of do a run through these and like pair them. I can't forget about discussion.
How's your session?
We're in the brainstorming phase right now.
Edgar. Yeah, so I guess two things. First, to flip an argument and then argue against it. I think arguably this Florida category is outside of our charter. I don't care about that. I think if we think it's the right thing, we should figure out how to get it done.
Yeah.
But I just want to make sure there's that sense so that we don't have those come back up again. I think that's the kind of thing you could charter for if you had to. Second, you suggested earlier in this conversation, are there things that would make people who are against the top level thing more comfortable? And I think we should also ask the opposite question, which is, are there other mechanisms of are there other mechanisms of applying some of the things that that people who think the top level thing is valuable could think of the probably same thing? I'm not particularly against the top level thing, but I'm just thinking about what the like other angles.
Sure, and so for example, if we, had tomorrow a submission of a galaxy of fine-grained controls that, address every possible use case you can think of right now, and, a commitment to further standards action down the road when new ones emerge, is that good enough?
First, yes.
Or can you compose robust text in other ways to achieve the same effect?
So I think that's actually a it is specifically what we usually offered, right? If we had a set of controls that tiled the entire possible space, right? That leaves you primarily, I think that's one example, was one thing that people want, which is they want to say, any other usage I never thought of, I also have covered. So I think that's probably worth spending a little time on. Is that really something that people, is it, I mean, so does that think people really want, number one? And it doesn't know what you should do, number two. And I think, this goes back, I think, to the dialogue we're having on the chat, but also the poll a minute ago, which is, one rubric is, if a critical mass of people want something and it's coherent, we should put it in somewhere. And if we're going to accommodate it, and another rubric is say, no, we think it's such a bad idea that we are next to independent judgment and say it's bad. And I think I'm somewhere towards we should support almost everything anybody wants if it's coherent, but I'm not quite sure. So I think maybe that would be helpful discussion.
Maybe just in response to that, maybe I'll say what I think is being unsaid here, which is there's a lot of people are very surprised by the emergence of what we're calling AI right now, and they don't want that to happen again.
Yeah, fair enough. But one, I think just to float the counter argument, which I think somebody offered, previously, which is that one consequence of having a very broad people doing exactly the thing you just said, which is everything is banned except one thing, is that that sort of thing cannot emerge. And one might think that, like, if you think that like AI is like terrible or should never have happened, then that's one thing. But if you think it's something that is good and has some negative side effects, then you probably don't want to create a situation where it can never emerge again.
Christopher.
Just on the for side, coming from a webmaster publisher side, the ease of implementation is important. So it's easier to kind of opt out, and then especially if you're using robots.txt, specifying different paths. You may want some to be searchable, some to be trainable, whatever, but that might take a little while to get sorted out. So you may want to opt out and then sort out what gets out, but then also the disallow all is ineffective at this point. So that's easily ignored, and we see it ignored. So maybe this will help.
Okay. So just, yeah, right. Easy.
Two things. I wanted to come back with Aaron's and the discussion about promotes market. I think it just cuts both ways, right? Like you can indeed sort of try to opt out of something specific if you think I want to have negotiations about that specific thing, or you could opt out of the top level category and with the expectation that that leads to a market urge. Like I think that the fact that we're building a vocabulary that lets you express a preference that you don't want this to happen is indeed for many mechanisms, like for many participants mechanisms to try to create this market, right? Like on whatever level you're thinking. So I don't think it really belongs in either of these columns, or at least in both, maybe. The other thing I wanted to say, and I thought Leonard would want to say, like, so channel him again, the point is that sort of like many other attachment mechanisms don't have an established no to all thing, which robots TXT has, right? Like, and we need to think here that there is sort of like, we are the IETF by standardizing that standard and allowing to sort of basically say you have no business here, has accepted that thing, even if it's detrimental to developing a lot of things. Maybe it's detrimental to innovation. There is an ability. We give people the ability to say no on the broadest possible range in robots TXT. Vocabulary is not only for robots TXT. The vocabulary is for a whole bunch of other attachment mechanisms. And I think if we it would be almost strange if we were saying, like, look, in our world here, you can say a complete no, but the vocabulary that we produce in order for our world to be compatible with other worlds, like, you cannot say no to everything. That's sort of like, that's just inconsistent to something. Like, I think that is mainly what I mean by, or what's on the thing now with completeness.
So can I call that vocabulary capability?
Yeah.
And I was on the queue for that earlier, Paul, so thank you.
Yeah, sorry, it disappeared.
Sonia.
So I mentioned it previously, but it would be good to just add it to the list. Oh my gosh, it's essentially not a top level category. We could put that as a question mark, but just say question whether it's a top level category. Because essentially now, particularly now that we've added inferencing, I think even Paul, in your first Open Future paper, you mentioned that inferencing wouldn't fall under a TDM exception as required by the EU. And so if we are wanting something that allows rights holders to express their rights as, required by the EU directive, that certainly wouldn't be a top level category in the way that we're defining it. And maybe it's, again, whether it's that we want to define something that essentially means computational processing, which I think would be hugely problematic. But if we want to take a more sensible approach to defining a TDM category as something that would be understood under the directive, that wouldn't include inferencing. And so, let's question whether it's a top level category. So I think just it's not necessarily misaligned with the regulation. I think just question top level category as a bullet point.
Right. I think it's actually both of these. I think I'm going to bullet. Because it's for me, there's a lot of questions about how it interfaces with stuff that is outside of it. Like,
yeah, I mean, say for example, most inferencing situations would fall under a temporary copies exception, for example. So if you had a TDM exception expressed under the directive, it wouldn't necessarily impact inferencing. And so let's make sure that that's clear.
But isn't that an argument against a specific TDM top level category and not like and I think it's a valid argument. I get me wrong, but I don't think it is a argument that speaks against or in favor of having a top level.
I think you can, I guess Yeah. What are we trying to say? Are we trying to say against TDM or, against something similar to TDM, against a way of expressing a TDM? Or is it against top level?
Right.
Because I think top
We're
level would be.
talking about any kind of top level category whatsoever right now, not necessarily specific text in the draft.
Okay, so I think technical feasibility needs to be there.
Yeah, I think so can you draw that out? What do you mean by technical feasibility?
So I think if you think of it in the context of what the TDM exception would impact, there's quite a clear area that wouldn't fall under the temporary copies exception, for example, but would require a TDM exception. If you think about how TDM is defined, and remembering it's really an exception to an exception, it wasn't intended to scope out what you couldn't do. That is essentially, broadly paraphrased, any computational processing. I mean, if we started to think about categories that we think would be useful for rights holders to control in relation to any activity online, we would never scope it that broadly to cover a top.
Right, and I think that's what this is going to capture. That it does get really fuzzy once you start thinking about where we draw the line of what we mean versus what's going to happen. If we can say that better.
I think it's more technically expensive. What would a top level category be? It would just be no, don't touch my stuff on the internet in any way.
Is this really just
in order to read, in order to do anything? I think that's the kind of thing that I'm thinking of in terms of technical feasibility.
Can I call this definitional impossibility?
Okay. Okay.
That's an assertion. I think that it's going to be really hard, if not impossible, to write this down.
Yeah, if we want it defined as a top level, yeah.
A true top level, yeah.
Warren, sorry. So this might fall into the inhibits innovation bit, but I'm concerned that we're designing something for people who are very competent and understanding what they want. There's good research showing that the majority of people just use the default robots.txt or whatever that ships with their CMS. And if we end up with a set of defaults that basically aren't usable for people, we haven't done anything useful here.
So give me a pithy way to put that on board.
Defaults matter. Yeah,
That's
not very.
How far does that go on?
The system needs to be clear enough for people to understand.
Right.
And if we have top levels which are knee-jerk reactions, users might apply them or CMSs might apply them. And then people aren't expressing anything useful. It's just a sort of knee-jerk, I like this thing, I don't like that thing, without any ability to actually use
Can I just call this leaving sharp tools around?
Yes.
Hey, Mark, can I jump the queue on that for one moment?
Sure.
I think the expression there that Lauren is aiming for is, what is it? Angela Sass's meaningful permissions model, right? It has to be something that that the user can meaningfully.
Elliot, your internet is surprisingly bad for someone who's 20 kilometers away.
Sorry about that. It's the Apple iPod, AirPod. I'll type it in.
We know where the hard is, probably has to.
Felix.
I think Paul made a really good point there that robots.txt has this top level category and the world didn't end, and some people use it for sort of TDM opt-out like purposes and other people use it for other purposes. So I'm thinking maybe we could sort of in the next step move the direction or move the discussion forward if we try to think of a category without sort of saying at the outset that it's going to be a top level category that encompasses everything that otherwise might be in the vocabulary, that sort of meets the needs of what people want to express here, and see if we can come up with a category that would actually meet those needs without saying it has to be a top level category or it has to be disallow all. Because like robots.txt is one of the contexts in which this has to be useful. So the category cannot be so broad as to disallow even looking at robots.txt. We probably want to stay within the charter. So there are certain constraints around like things that should be outside of the scope of this category. So maybe it's more productive to try to come up with a category that meets the needs of what this category is supposed to achieve, and then consider whether it needs to be hierarchical or not, or whether it needs to be considered top level.
Does that, I'm struggling to see how we can talk that on the board. Are you happy just to look that?
It's not for or against, so yeah, again, more against, but it's more like compromise proposal.
Thank you. Sebastian?
So I think meaningful categories would be a good point, maybe to say, and to address what Sonia and Caleb said. So I think we should be clear what we are meaning when we talk about top level. So because if you think about the drawing in the graph, there could be different ways to encapsulate different categories. So you could have, let's say, the pre-training or the post-training and the search in different kind of boxes. And the question is that the top level, what you are intending here and what we are discussing here, like the overall category, or would it be like that search in general, it would be excluded from that kind of top level, or even the AI use category would be excluded from that, because then the top level, so to speak, would categorize things like AI training or generative AI training in that sense. So I'm not fully clear what top level means and what the group thinks it means.
Sure, and I think we need to develop that. I mean, our starting position, I think, is that it encompasses everything with an asterisk by it because of what Sonia was saying, that there is still a. I don't think anyone intends for this to apply to a human using a web browser, right? So that's out of scope. So the question is, are there other things out of scope? Where do we draw the line? How do we draw the line? But in terms of everything else we define within our scope, I think the intention is to include that. Now we can have proposals to change that, or compromises to move in that direction. Tammy.
Hi there. I wasn't at yesterday's session, so. Oh, sorry, I'm echoing. So I do apologise if any of this was covered then. But I suppose the key point for us is about encouraging good behaviour and to encourage best practice. And so, although at the moment having it top level might be problematic in having a sort of block all, because we have kind of hybrid user agents which are doing multiple purposes, I think that we would love to get to a place where the vocabulary actually encourages better practice in terms of user agents actually stating their purpose more clearly, so that we don't have to block when we're okay with the purpose, and that we have the option to block when we're not okay with the purpose.
Sonia?
So it's difficult to see what the intention is around the top level category. Maybe we could talk about that a little bit more, because I've heard that it's to express a TDM exception, but now I've understood that it isn't. It's just from a hierarchical perspective, do we need something that is top level? And therefore, would that mean just a switch that allows you to say no to all categories that are defined and nothing more? Because that seems like it could be useful. Just thinking, because Krishna's proposal in my head, like having a switch that just says no to all of those might be an easy thing. And that still will be top level, but is that how we're thinking about what top level is? Or does it have to be an additional category that kind of includes all of those categories plus something else? Because I'm not seeing what the need for that something else is.
So I think it's going to depend on who you talk to. But for some folks, it's this ease of use concept, and that's more what you're talking about there, that it's, so I don't have to flip 15 switches, I can just flip one, if that's my intent. Or I can flip one off and then flip 3 on, or you know, it's a convenience. And really a user interface avoidance. But for other folks, or in combination with that, we have this, you know, preventing this unknown uses, which has come up, which is, again, I think a lot of people feel that the AI came along and surprised them and they didn't have any way to control that, and they don't want that to happen again. And that's probably one of the harder things we have to talk about is, you know, what's the appropriate way to, you know, and should we try to address that? I think those are the two aspects here.
So then it becomes kind of a category of no to anything that I don't know about, essentially. And that doesn't necessarily need to be top level.
Conceptually, you need to, this goes into the hierarchy discussion.
Because you know, I mean, they're mutually exclusive, right? You either know about them or you don't.
Right.
And if we're saying something.
If you express it in that particular way, perhaps, yeah.
So, you know, I don't. Yeah. But so the reason for the top level, which is additional to a switch that just turns all of the known categories off, I don't think we've got the reason why we need that yet. Particularly if it's not something that, you know, is a TDM that maps to an EP regulation. Which again, I don't think is top level, but
well,
it's
it's probably better for our discussion if we ignore the TDM aspect for right now.
Well, then, can we add to the list lack of rationale to include a top level, not something that the box says no unknown.
We're seeing it here. We're seeing it here. Now you can disagree with these rationales, or you can come up with things. And I think you just were starting to go down that path of you have a mitigation where if you express that in a different way, where it's not a top level, you may be able to have the same effect, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's.
Maybe it falls under the definitional impossibility, like in terms of what else are we trying to. Okay.
And then really the only way to mitigate that one is to come up with a definition that passes muster.
Yeah. Yeah. And is top level.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I think Elliot, go. Elliot? Calling Elliot Lear. No, he's out. Yeah, Buzz.
I still continue chat. I don't know if we want to make focus on it, but we don't have many small bloggers and site operators in the room. And I was thinking about this as somebody who has a website, and I want to appear in search, and I want my like the data that I put on the website to be trained for AI to train it and do whatever they want. So, but just recently, I received a notification from Google that robots.txt, because it disallowed indexing certain pages that I didn't know of, and it didn't appear in search. So I think that having a broad category that is not that for that small site operator that doesn't know what they are like opting into or opting out of could be problematic.
So I think that's the leading sharp tools item that we talked about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I think we've been saying top level, and I think I just want to push on that term for a moment, because top level, as far as observing me, that applies to kind of hierarchy, and you can have something that's top level, but also is not exhaustive. And in fact, the current thing is somewhat not exhaustive, but fairly exhaustive. You can find something less exhaustive, like, don't feed this in any AI systems when you had to define AI. That would preclude, some new thing that wasn't AI and merge into it, like, I don't know what that thing would be. It would call it AI, or whatever. So I think, so one could believe that you wanted I guess what I'm trying to say is you want to stay at the top of the hierarchy for like ontological reasons, but that it can actually be relatively narrow, and in fact could be imagined with the union of the whole things that are currently in this list and nothing else, right? And as opposed to a catch-all category, which is like basically all things known and unknown. And so I guess I like to push on, is the required people really asking for a catch-all, or is it really for having a thing at the top of the hierarchy? And if it is, and I think that maybe you could say a third thing, which I sort of heard floating around, which is there's a need for a thing which is not quite a catch-all, but which reflects some pre-existing set of cases, which I think people would say TDM somehow like think people already think is anchoring the need. So like maybe if we try to break down between which of those three things people are actually advocating for, we can help them.
I was just going to say, in terms of the I think kind of rips off that last comment, isn't the challenge that we're trying to address, like it may be the case that people want to prevent future things that we don't know about. I think there's also a category of things where we haven't defined them as separate subcategories. Because I think the challenge is if we have a top level, whatever we're calling it, catch-all, and then it's applied broadly. So technically it means that we turn off everything. Doesn't that then mean that we need categories to be able to turn on everything that we might not have intended to have turned off? And we currently have a few of those, but not all of them. And we keep saying, oh, but it doesn't mean this. But unless we have a switch to, excuse me, a switch to turn that back on, how does someone express that? Like, unless there's a way of saying, oh, I didn't mean that piece, unless we have a category that allows you to turn that back on, there's no way of expressing that preference. You either have everything and nobody can utilize that, or you can only switch on the specific ones, which is, I think goes to Sonia's point, which is if this is a category to turn off the specific categories that we've identified, then that kind of makes more sense. But if it's like we turn off everything and you just have to live with the unintended consequences, and you can't turn those, you can't re-preference those in unintended consequences, then are we just defining something that can't be usable? I don't know how that fits into the structure.
I'm tempted to say that there's an implicit lag in if a new use case emerges and top level is out there, it creates pressure against that new use case until it turns into authority.
I think that's right, but I also think that there are existing use cases.
Sure.
That we have
already some in that stage, yes.
That we are assuming that people will be fine with not having as a result of.
Right. I mean, in some ways, that's inhibits innovation. That's just yeah.
Yeah, I think I think it's a really bad idea to have something like everything we define to an off switch undefined this in the protocol. Because it's, first of all, it's bad for extendability, because you need to know at that point of time what were the categories that were defined. And so whenever you extend it somehow, you need to signal that, makes extensibility harder. And second, it's really not a protocol problem, it's a usability or tooling problem. So you can always design a tool that creates a robot.txt for you, and you can have a switch, turn everything off. But the robot.txt should then have each of the categories set to no. And there are many usability problems with robot.txt that you can solve with tooling, and we shouldn't just change the protocol and add another category to address that point.
Yeah, so I'm asking the chairs now, can we start to move into the next phase of this discussion? I think I'm starting to hear the same arguments over and over again. And I've heard the same arguments over and over again for almost a year now. And I'd like to start to winnow this down to the things that are important. I'm hearing this unknowns thing, and I think James had a really good point. There are things that we know about that we're not labeling that are in here, and I don't think that's in your taxonomy here, and I think it needs to be a separate point, is that it's the Rumsfeld thing. There are the things that we've labeled, the known knowns, There are the known unknowns, which is the things that exist and we don't have labels for. And then there are the unknown unknowns, which is the future unanticipated or unknown possibilities that are coming up. And I think that's, for me, probably the biggest unknown question in all of this that needs to be addressed before we get through anything else.
I think it's the far side, the second one, the unknown uses is in there. If you turn around. The second one was the unknown uses.
No, I have it on my screen in front of me as well. I think I don't want to turn around. Yeah, it's pretty hard to read.
I've just added known unknown to the unknown uses.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, I don't know that that's necessarily a for argument. I heard what James was saying as an against argument.
Sure.
Right. So,
but I think what we can do is identify that as one of the crucial issues we need to figure out before we can make progress.
yeah, that's kind of what I'm suggesting here is that the crucial argument appears to be something along the lines of what Sonia was just talking about. Do we put something in so that people can say things that I don't know about, yes or no, or do we just concentrate on the things that we are able to enumerate and put into our ontology such that those are the only things that people can express preferences on. And if you want to express preferences on some new unknown thing or previously unknown thing, then we have to go through the exercise of defining a label for it and whatnot. I think that's really the key point of disagreement about this one. I think there's a bunch of FUD on that list, not to put things too mildly. And I think most of these things we can work through, but I think that one's kind of the key question for me.
Daniel? Miriam, can you pass the mic?
Sorry.
Files you need to anticipate. It's better with your.
That mic is mine. That's my mic.
Martin, that could not be a better transition. And Mark, you can decide whether to include this as a new item or whether it's in service of your point of getting deeper on some of them. But I don't think we've really interrogated the expectations misalignment that this could cause. People in this room are going to understand what the top level category means should we include one, but it's not clear to me that the average webmaster will understand this doesn't include search already, or it doesn't include fetching, or things like that. And that expectations misalignment, I think, is what I'm hearing as a thread through a lot of these, that we are all assuming a common understanding of, that I do not think will be widely shared, especially by smaller players or the average webmaster. And if we're going to make something that works, I think for a chunk of this, I assume that was a definitional problem, that you could define a specific category or top level bounded category that would solve that problem. And the more I hear this discussion, the more I'm convinced by Sonia's point that there is an impossibility problem here, maybe because of a fundamental misalignment, or maybe because some of us think that a top level category would need to be bounded, and some people think unbounded is the only acceptable top level category. And so I think until we resolve that problem, I'm not sure how you get out of the fundamental tension. Right. And I heard you bring up kind of the definitional possibility, the leaving sharp tools, and the no consistent understanding. So I'm more confident with working covering these. Folks, can we have one conversation? Because we have the remote folks. Thanks. Who's next?
Yeah, I'm next. So I think like one thing that I think we've kind of mixed together is the hierarchy and not the hierarchy. I think that's something we need to consider because I do believe in some of the stuff like, James brought up and Eker brought up as well, like, are we trying to close off like unknown users? But like, I also am swayed by the people who say like, hey, I do want some stuff that like corresponds to some regulatory thing that they want to do, right? So like, does a EU TDM opt out, like kind of be hierarchical over the other things is probably something we need to discuss separately, I think, right? Because like it's possible that somebody does want to plunge to kind of bludgeon the whole thing, right? Like, but that shouldn't be affecting unknown future uses for other people, right? I think that's probably something we can piece apart in the future if we decide to go down here. Like, should we have a more force tool for people to express things, right? And that may not have the encompassing preference for the other people.
So I just want to throw it in because it's not for or against, but I think there's like two things here, not one.
I want to sort of echo what Martin said, that sort of we need to move to the next stage of this discussion. I think we've heard an excellent list of reasons for and against both. And the way to figure out what we can do is probably going to see and define the category, and then see when we have a defined category, test them in this list of places. There's one other thing I want to point out. If we go back to yesterday morning's first poll about shipping a limited set of things, I think the ability to ship a limited set of categories to reach consensus on that probably increases if we have a top level category, because it covers some of the stuff that people may be concerned about, but that we are unable to maybe reach consensus on, although I'm not that pessimistic. Like, I think we have by now a number, like yesterday at least I counted 3, for example, specific proposals for the inference thing. Krishnan's, there was Aaron's proposal, which I understand a lot of people did maybe not see because it was sort of like at the very end of a longer, a fairly long email on the list. And we have Brad's proposal who's not here, and sort of like going through these categories, which like we haven't come up with other categories. We haven't come up with other things to slice and dice this since our very first meeting. And going into these categories and trying to reach consensus on what we mean by that categories may at the end help us to resolve this. Like, I think it's a very good list of things that people are concerned about. Let's use it as a checklist, but let's move on.
Kevin.
I think what I have to say will sound similar, but I'm pushing in a different direction. One more similar to Leah's point in chat. I wonder if a purely ontological approach is not where we're going to find consensus. I think that always comes back to the default yes, default no argument. And we haven't even gotten to the point of trying to agree on language for specific category definitions, which has been a pleasure in the past. I wonder if something like either Krishna's display proposal or Brad Silver's substituted use proposal on the list is more about the properties of outcomes. That doesn't require anticipating doesn't require enumerating a specific list of use cases that exist either now or may exist in the future, is a better direction to spend our time on.
So, the underlying, I think, design requirement is to be able to say the things that people need to be able to say, right? That's like the point of the exercise. We already have a way to say about everything, right? That's just the current state of play.
Sorry, you lost the mic.
We have a way to say allow everything. That's the current state of play. And we have a way to say disallow specific things that everyone agrees we should have that, right? The creation of a catch-all category has the consequence of saying forbid everything except the things that are specifically named or allowed, right? And so I think that may or may not be a good idea, but the consequence of that is that for all things you know about that people might wish to do, you need to make sure there's a way to express that you can do them. Because otherwise what happens is there's no way to say, forbid everything I don't know about, but also allow these specific things unless like the union of all like other subcategories matches up to everything people want to do now. And so it undercuts the ability to say default no if you can't opt into things you want to opt into, right? And so I think that like you know, so all I'm saying on this is like, if we do decide to have a default no, then we have to be very, very cautious to make sure that the list of other categories adds up to all the things people currently do now. Or you get into some weird way you can't say a very important coherent thing, which is allow the specific thing, but also default no. Right. And it undercuts, and will be discouraged if you're doing default no, by the way, if you want to have default no.
Right. So I guess that puts us in an interesting place. I'm hearing that if we separate out the hierarchy issue from the unknown issue here, and just if this was just a list about against a category for unknown or maybe undefined is a better term vocabulary, then this list might change a little bit, and maybe we'd focus a little more. But I'm also hearing that if we make progress on the rest of the vocabulary, as we talked about yesterday, we started that potentially fairly long journey, you might give people more comfort in one way or another about this discussion. So it might be good to put a pin in this. And of course, if people want to talk about it in the background or make proposals, please feel free to do that. But let's go ahead and put a pin in this for now. And let's do a break. Yeah? You need coffee, don't you? All right, let's take a half an hour. So let's come back at 10:50. We'll be back in 30 minutes or what, folks?
Generating these. No.
We're gonna get started again.
Thought it is a rags process. Okay, so, but I don't want people to think they're like opting into certain that drag and I'm like.
Yeah, it's not that perfect. Instead, it has to be about somehow outputs, display.
So how many people are still outside? A couple of people are like.
So why do we just?
I think this comes down to the substituted nature of the things and how we have.
Is this substitute?
That is. I think that is.
That's exactly what I think it's fun. You think it's fun. How does one?
I think that's the purpose, like why we do it. But I don't think you can write substitute into the category that was what I wanted to do. That is. Yeah. I guess for long time publishers argued that having snippets, but.
Yeah.
So you're starting off.
We're going. We're to finish it now.
Yeah. We're all done.
We solved it. You just do it, Aaron.
Yes, I like that.
We start to get into it and then.
Okay.
We can have that here for this year.
Do people have any interesting discussions to report from the break? Looking pointedly to my right.
Yeah, I'll focus on Erin. So she's solved it, apparently.
So before the break, we were talking about this top level or perhaps default or undefined preference. And one of the things that we talked about was that it might be easier to have that discussion once we have more confidence in the more granular preferences that we talked about yesterday. And it sounds like people have been talking about that on the side. I know we've got a few proposals. So what we thought was we'd spend more time today talking about those proposals, see where we can find agreement, in the room at least, on potential ways forward there. So was there any interesting discussion of the report?
Yes, but
Nothing substantive?
I don't know that I could summarize it very effectively.
I think. I will take it. I will attempt to summarize it very briefly. Which, we were talking about the line drawing difficulties of a substitutive category because we are sympathetic to the difference between something that feels intended to be just read in the page and something that is much more link forward and intended, or appears intended to drive traffic out. The problem is the line drawing. And that's where we were kind of debating which uses we thought would be more substitutive in practice and where we thought that content providers would be more likely to object or more likely to think, this is beneficial to me. And we did not arrive at principles in that discussion, but we are cautiously optimistic that we may in future.
So,
yeah.
Go ahead.
I think from my perspective, the problem, the way this is currently defined is extraordinarily technical, the properties of the thing. And it's the attempt to be a proxy, it seems like, for these intuitions people have about what's substitute and what's not. But I think, I guess my fear, as I think Richard's suggesting, is that when one pushes on that, one discovers that actually it's not a very good substitute for those things because these are some kind of balancing test as opposed to being online. And I guess to say one thing, I think you and our opinions a minute ago, when people look at this from a legal perspective, there's a huge amount of very of actually trying to look at is this substitutive in some way, and I'm I'm a little worried that we're not going to be able to get out of that hole with any kind of thing that is are there links or how many characters there are there. I mean, the character thing is attractive because it feels if the number is small enough, then it can't be substitutive. But I'm worried the rest of these things. I'm not sure about.
Superficially, my approach is that. So one of the tools we have available in the IETF is the concept of a design team. When we have the need to come up with a substantive proposal that incorporates, multiple viewpoints. You can task a subset of the group to go off, come up with that proposal and bring it back. That proposal doesn't have any special standing in the group. There's no assumption that it's going to be accepted, but it's a way to make progress on things. I'm wondering if that's something people would consider for some of these uses, for example, for substitute use. Just something to keep in mind as a tool that we have available to us. So we had proposals from Krishna, which we started to discuss yesterday. We can continue to discuss those fine-grained preferences, especially around search, perhaps. We had one from Bradley. Bradley's not with us, but we can still discuss that. Aaron, you seem to have the beginnings of a proposal, perhaps? Not ready yet?
Not ready.
Not ready yet. So perhaps let's go back to Krishna's proposal to start. Sure.
I think like Michael had his hand up.
We're
We submitted a proposal.
Okay.
For the vocabulary.
Okay.
So I think the bigger difficulty is, right, like, so what all the proposals we've seen are somehow additive to the vocabulary or like somehow kind of overlapping with the current vocabulary draft, right? So nothing seems to be like substitutive for that, right, like for lack of a better term. But we kind of need to combine those things because I don't think they're like the display-based stuff is like standalone, like sufficient, right? Like, so we have to figure out, I think that's kind of the line drawing part because it's not clear to me how we can define it. I think part of this hand wringing is because it's not clear what is substitutive, right? I think Ecker's point maybe like number of characters might be a proxy for it, but I'm not sure about that either, right? Like, so the question is maybe it's like even a 50-word summary might be enough to not follow the links. I think that's actually some issues that somebody brought up before. So I think that's, unless we have a proposal on the table, I think it's going to be difficult to discuss if it makes sense or not, right? Because I think something potentially having these two properties is good, but it's not apparent to me how this can be.
Felix, you had a.
Yeah, I think it would be useful to kind of put next to each other Krishna's display text category, Aaron's AI non-linked use category, and Bradley's substitutive use category, because I think they're all trying to solve the same issue and try to see if we can come up with a text that works for everybody.
So one of the things that that's good. Okay, one of the things that sort of informed the discussion that we were having just now was Aaron's little demonstration of how the search is evolving in a direction much more toward having generative content, and I don't know that a lot of people have had an active discussion about that. It would be, I think, quite helpful with the three examples that Felix just pointed out to walk through that as a sort of test of whether or not we can understand what those things mean in that context, understanding, of course, that this is just one of many examples, and we do run the risk of making things too search specific if we focus on it too much, but it may still be informative. We had some difficulty, I think, coming to agreements about what applied in each of the 4 different sort of ways that we can spell this currently that's available. And I think it might be better if we bring the room up to speed on that conversation rather than just pretending that it's happened in some people's heads. So I suggest that we ask Aaron to put it up on the screen and talk us through it and talk through some of the considerations. So I'm going to put you on the spot, but I think it's useful.
Okay, here is my first ever attempt to screen share.
One could go. Good thing you're here.
I think it worked.
You have it.
Okay,
Erin, just so you know, this is going to be recorded and it'll be available. So.
Yes. Okay, so what I am presenting is an experimental feature. It is available in Google Labs if you opt into that, although it may not be launched in Switzerland. I cannot encourage you to get a VPN and switch your country. I personally, as a US resident, often use a VPN to maintain familiar web experiences. But you will, of course, make your own decisions. We all respect.
You're saying this is not legal advice, is what
It is never legal advice.
It's not strictly speaking illegal advice.
But okay, so the thing that we wanted to talk about here is this mechanism of using AI to organize and provide context to the search results page. I think yesterday we heard a lot of discussion about AI overviews, which is much more long form and kind of segmented off from other parts of the SERP. And when I say SERP, I mean search results page, SRP. But here, what we have is a fairly high-level introductory category. This example is birdwatching tips for beginners. Try other things if you are in a jurisdiction that you have labs access. And it basically breaks this high-level query down into multiple subsidiary categories that are useful ways into this topic, and then organizes the results within those categories. So for the query birdwatching tips for beginners, we have a category comprehensive birdwatching tips for beginners, but we also have getting started with birdwatching, video guides, forum discussions, equipment guides, and apps. And each of those categories has a short form multi-word label, and then a slightly longer bit of generated text explaining what the category is and why it is relevant to your search. And so at the break, we were looking at this and discussing different people's intuition about whether those generated texts should be in the scope of the search use category in the Keller draft, where it says that only those parts of the search application that direct users out to third-party content are covered, and not the summaries that are generated from that. And I think this is, it splits that division pretty neatly, because it is generated text, it is sentence level, but, and it is in some way expressing what is in those pages. But not maybe what we would think of as a classical summary of here are all of the points that those pages make. So I was really using this to kind of problematize some of the distinctions we've been making between link-based search and generative text summaries, with my overarching point being that there is definitely a continuum of things that are just a pure link to a link with some text, to a link with some generated text that might not be objectionable to a website operator, to a long form summary that does seem intuitively to be more substitutional. So I think that's my little pitch, and maybe we could discuss if folks want.
So it might be helpful here to think about this from the perspective of the different proposals that we have on the table, and sort of go through each one of them and sort of say, this is my interpretation, these are where the interpretation is a little fuzzy, and this is where it's firm, and sort of kick that off. I think it's probably worth talking about the definition of search that we have in the current document. I think there's an interpretation of this that says that these are all the trappings of directing people to those web pages. And so if it's the top level definition, where it gets a little fuzzy is the summaries of content is not covered by that definition. So we put a sentence in the current draft that says overviews or summaries of the content of a particular asset are not included. And parts of applications that do not direct users to the location of assets, such as summaries, are not covered by this category of use. Now, I would say we didn't quite agree on this point as we discussed this earlier, but I would posit that these are still part of the application that directs someone to the feed, because it says specifically you should care about these links because, rather than these are a substitution for those links. And that's in your very specific example that you have there. And other people were like, well, it really is a summary of the contents of those things, and so it's a little bit fuzzy. Can someone else sort of volunteer to sort of explain how they see this working within the context of the other proposals?
Can I just give the opposite? Like, I think this language clearly, like, on the face of it, like, I think this category would make that thing impossible because of that part that you read out. Parts of applications, like if you take each of the individual paragraphs as a part, like that would mean you would need to remove the both probably the title and the summary in order to make this, at which point, like, I think this doesn't make any sense anymore. So like, I think this clearly points to why the language that we have in the current draft is not good.
But I mean, this is not a summary of one page, it's a summary of
Yeah, so what Mary is saying is it's not a summary of one page, it's a summary of all of the pages in that category. And I think this is true of AI overviews as well, and the summaries that we have, which is why this text becomes particularly problematic. I think I disagree with Paul, but I could see how this would be a very entertaining session in court somewhere. And I don't think that's really what we're looking for here, is we're not looking to send people to court to resolve these things. We would rather have them resolved by having a clear definition in here.
I think it points to the fact that the language here can be improved.
Yeah. So what does Krishna say?
We have a queue, by the way, so let's try it.
Sanger. Yeah, I mean, I think less interesting than doing hermeneutics on these particular texts is what is it trying to do. And like, if you sort of think about that, so we talked about this at our session on a spectrum. On the one hand, we have like 10 blue links or something, or blue links or some colored links with nothing. Then, and then on the far end, we have a deep research application, which actually provides like an enormous report. It has a pile of links that allegedly or substantiate the things in the deep research application, but like which stands alone, right? And
it doesn't provide the links at all. Huh? What doesn't provide the links at all?
Oh, well, all the deep research ones do provide links. I think it's clearly the case that like the intention here is to rule out things that do not provide any outlinks. But like, is the intent to scope in here like anything which has like some outlinks of some kind, or is the intent to scope in here things which smell much more like traditional than blue links, right? And like, or is the intent here to provide some toolkit that people that sites might wish to use to opt into some subset of those experiences and not others, right? So I mean, it's like there's like one question of like, can these particular pieces of text people propose, do they capture like intuition people have? But like, I think the more interesting question is, what are the things we are attempting to like roll in and roll out, or attempting to provide like a relatively complicated program someone could like imagine running. It describes many particular things allowed in or out and they're coherent. And also I think, and just finally, I'm like a little concerned about if we go that last route, is this like remotely implementable by people that are actually trying to build a system like this, or do you end up with like really something minor? So I don't know how useful that is, but like I think what I don't want to do is spend a lot of time analyzing each particular piece of text to determine whether or not like it allows a particular thing or not.
I think it's Leonard remote.
Leonard.
Yeah, I just want to remind folks that when we talk about search, we're not only talking about textual search, like the example that was just shown, but this also applies to image, video, and other asset search as well. So for example, one of the things you're seeing in a number of stock sites, Adobe Stocks, Shutterstock, etc., is offering users generative results based on their queries. So rather than not only showing them pre-existing assets, but leveraging their query as a prompt or part of a prompt to do generation. And so things like our current text actually apply very well because it makes it clear that you've got, directing users to pre-existing assets as well as things that are generative in nature, for example. And so I just wanted to remind everyone to not narrow our scope only to the simple or common search cases, but also things like image and other asset searches. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. So I always keep going back to what Ecker said yesterday, right? Like, about like being specific, right? So I'm just thinking, if there's something that's called dynamic categories, for lack of, I'm sure you have this really cool name for this, right? But I think dynamic categories is something that could be under search and be allowed, because I don't think anybody's gonna say, hey, this is really substitutive use, right? Like, at least like me, when I look at it, like anybody who expresses an issue probably won't have an issue with this because it doesn't have enough things to kind of be a substitutive use, and it does have the outgoing links. And if that specific thing exists, then this problem goes away, right? Like, so if you have a definition for something which accurately describes it, I think like I'm getting more and more into Ecker's camp. If you have a way of describing things like people would want to do, like then it becomes easier and we don't have to worry about unintended consequences because people can actually say what are the things they want to do or not.
Yeah, I think this is a very helpful example, and I would be interested not to just hear kind of how this would work in the context of the search category, but also how this would work in the context of the various substitutive use categories. So I don't know, Aaron or Krishna, if you could kind of run us through how this specific scenario would work in the context of your category. So in the context of display text or in the context of the non-linked use category, because I'm not 100% sure where the dice would fall on those ones. And maybe it's easier to try to define that category first and then come back to the search category later.
So, I mean, I guess I'll note that Ecker said we could sharpen the text for the specific use case. And Suresh said, we could include a new thing, dynamic categories. This is very new. I think it's really useful for users. I think it's something that should definitely be allowed, but it's new. And I don't understand how we're going to come up with a set of vocabulary for each new thing as it comes along and decide, is this reasonable use, is it not? I realize I've been arguing we need specific things, but maybe we are over-specifying some things. Oh, sorry.
What is the new thing that would be useful of which you speak?
I think these dynamic categories or web guides are useful. I think they're useful for users because it gives a overview of what sort of pages are going to be here without actually having the content of the page. But it's something which we've only started talking about in the last little bit. And we're like, this seems great. Let's include a label for it. Well, we're like, we could have a thing called dynamic categories. Okay, maybe I
was misunderstood. I wasn't suggesting we should draft a category for a specific use case. I was saying let's use this edge case to test the various proposals that we have and explain how the category would work. I think of this use case as an example.
I think that's a good approach. We should see if we think things like this are allowed, and I think they're great and useful. Will they fall into our existing taxonomy, etc.? So I think we're in violent agreement on that. Who next? Serena. They have a mic?
Yeah, I have. So I think a big challenge into defining these categories is sort of like this, navigating this line between being ambiguous and then sort of like the intention of the publisher is not content owners is not well captured, or being too specific and then sort of restricting things that they would like to enable. And I guess that's where dynamic categories would be, a good approach. But I think from the perspective of a cautious publisher, what I would like to do is like, okay, maybe I go for like a more restrictive list of categories, or like restrict the definition as much as possible, but then I still maybe want to opt in into specific products, which are very like, I guess, like end to end, you understand sort of like what is a downstream use case of your content. So like, I would like after I might have already published my levels of text to be able, like when I see, for example, what like Google search is doing, to say like, hey, I want to be able to opt in into that, without sort of like being in a challenge of like, okay, how should the current like rules and definition I provided for my preferences change to accommodate that, which I guess is going to be the challenge for many people, because in the room it's also like a bit hard to define those. So yeah, I guess my point is like, is there a possibility to like have some exceptions where you specify specific products, or specific sort of like new categories that you want to opt in, which are like, I guess, next to the more broader definition that you invite to.
Paul, it's you. I'm out.
So the obvious weird thing here is that we wouldn't have this discussion if like Google employed a couple of people to just type these things as you go, right? Like if this is something like, I don't think anybody would have noticed this as something problematic if we sort of do away the sort of preceding 2.5 years and all the discussion about AI. Like this is obviously useful. This would have been called categorization of search results. Nobody would give an inch about 2 extra sentences sort of directing people to the links. So I think that's and to some degree, I think that's the thing that we need to solve. And I think some of the proposals, Krishna, et cetera, go in that direction, saying like, it's not about like how we produce this, but how sort of like the end result to some degree, right? And I think the risk with being sort of like the risk of saying like, first, we don't want to direct people into the direction of like first say no to everything. We need to somehow establish, give them mechanisms like people who, like a lot of people who are burnt, for lack of a better word, by what happened in the past 2.5 years, or what sort of emerged over the past 2.5 years, which happened before, right? To trust the system to some degree, okay, like this is, and this is where, in the end, like I think it is about substitution. And so, like I think there is merit in really trying to sort of marry some of the mechanisms that Krishna and others have proposed, but package them better in a way that where it addresses the concern of substitution. So like I think like one of the biggest weaknesses of your proposal is that it's called display-based preferences, right? Like it was something like if this concern was addressed in like how we frame the categories, like I think it will be much easier to make steps forward.
What is the concern of substitution? Repeat that on the.
The concern of substitution is that sort of I think a lot of web publishers see referral traffic declining at the same time that a lot of these sort of like summary type things, either sort of search summaries or like also the sort of less search forward chat applications appear, and they just like, I think, without understanding if there's really a correlation between like these two things correlate, right? Like is there causation? I think maybe a few people in this room know, but like many people like in the publishing community certainly don't know, but they feel like there is causation. And so that's sort of like, I think what we're trying to summarize under this term, like this, they are having the feeling there were instruments that worked and that get substituted by new behavior that is sort of like that directs more of the benefit towards the providers of these tools and less of the benefit to the providers of the content.
So for instance,
Mike, use the mic.
It's here.
I'll do it. I can do it.
We make it like this.
so for instance, the Copilot summary.
It's not on.
So for instance, the fact that I've read the Copilot summary and it's good enough means that I do not go look at the content page.
Yes, that's the point.
Okay, that's substitution. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think probably this example is a good entryway into the discussion, but it is not the discussion that we really need to be having here, because this is kind of the tippy top of a slope that has no clearly marked points. And Eric pointed out this question of the research applications. Obviously, you have these chat applications that just produce text, and there's no links, and that would clearly not qualify as a search application under the current terms that we've got. It is potentially purely substitutive in the sense that there's no way for someone to go to the original source to get the information that they're seeking. The AI overview sort of sits somewhere else in the middle where you get the opportunity to see the links, but because you've given the content, there's no need to follow the links. And then there's the sort of things that likely fit in between on that spectrum, where you have clues or snippets that give you the information that, and so I don't know that we can use any of the proxies that we have to get there. Can we talk about the substitution aspects of it? I think, see Krishna ahead of me. I would like you to sort of address that question a little bit more and address whether or not you think that your proxy is a good proxy as opposed to a, can we get one step closer to the thing that people really care about in the top of these things? And using Erin's example as maybe an attractive nuisance in the sense that it is, to a lot of people in this room, unobjectionable, I suspect, and probably to publishers as well who look at this and see that this is just a more effective way to direct people to visit their web pages. And so I'm more interested in the gap between that and something like a deep research where the information is presented alongside links, but the information the information is there. You don't need to go to the web page to get the information. You would only go there if you needed to double check or get more information that was presented to you.
Sure. Thank you. By the way, I hear all the feedback about the nomenclature of display, and I'll deal with it separately. I understand the concern there. But just going back to the example that was shown, keeping it product agnostic, the display text category, if it is disallowed, the content of that particular document is not used for generating the summary up there on top. And if the document allows it and limits the text length, for example, then only the allowed length would be used in the generation of that summary. If it was an exact text match option that has been set to yes, this essentially means that if that summary relies on the content of a document that is being used to generate the response, it must cite the exact content and limit it to the length of the document. I hear that, how do we do this for images? How do we do this for video? I hear that part. But just focusing in on this particular use case, the display text essentially addresses many of the concerns about a document's content being used to generate exactly the kinds of things that we are seeing in many of the experiences. Now, I'm not talking specifically about the Google example. My employer would have concerns about it, but I will just say that it does address this particular scenario without making it overly generic. So,
It's Caleb. Just two little points about Aaron's example and where this is leading us. The first is, in the world of a top-level catch-all category, this would not have come about, and so would not be available to be tested to test our hypotheses. And second is that it is very difficult to have a permission that is based on whether the product that you ultimately develop by using the stuff that is subject to the permission increases or decreases clicks from some unknown baseline to one or more group of web publishers. But we can't have we here are saying it would be cool if it increased traffic, but if you're thinking about building the thing, you can't build the thing and find out if it will have been unlawful had you, or, will have been contrary to permission had you, if it doesn't work right. So it's just a hard problem for an implementer to fix.
Yeah. You wanted to. And kind of wanted to say something similar. It's also coming up in chat. I think substitute is not like the right term, and it's like used as an equivalent to reducing clicks. But what happens is that these features improve usability, which leads to reducing clicks because people actually don't click on stuff they don't want to click on. Like in this case, if I don't have the categories, I would just click on the first 3 links to just figure out that the third link is the one that I was looking for. While if I have the categories, maybe I click right away on the right guide and read that guide only and not the other pages. So at the end, we're reducing clicks because we are reducing clicks to things that people actually don't want. And the similar thing is for the other examples that were in chat. Like if I just want to understand what's the temperature in the city today, I don't want to read like a long article. I just want a number. And if I get this number, I'm happy. And that reduces clicks, yes, but it improves usability because I provide the information that the user is actually looking for in a better way. And that's what we're using, that's no matter if you're using AI or a different way, but I think that's kind of what these kind of functions want to optimize usability. And it's unfortunate for some people that it reduces clicks because that reduces income to some extent, but that doesn't depend on AI, it depends on improving usability.
So I'm sure that is true to some extent. I don't think it's true to every extent. So I think I go back to this example of research, right? It's like, the purpose of a deep research application is to read and summarize things you don't have to read and read them yourself. And it's absolutely the case that when you read that paragraph that says, when we measured this, we had the results, blah, blah, that like a substitute for you reading the document. And that doesn't, and so, it may be the case as part of suggesting that that's perfectly congruent, but it is the function it is doing is having it not go there and go here instead. I don't think unfortunately it would be nice if it were the case that this was just not in fact having disintermediating people who didn't want to be disintermediated for good reason, and no impact on what these want, but on this true. I don't know quite how to break this down, but one thing I think that is a line perhaps that I feel like some of this text suggestion is trying to draw is between what the user intent is and sort of one. So users at some level users may want to do one of two. They want to 3 things. They don't want to or maybe more. They may want to get answers, which is often what user attention is for. They may want to actually find specific things, which also search engines do. And those two have typically been glued together in some way, right? I want the answer, and I want to find the pages. And one of the things that the accelerated technologies have done is basically kind of broken this apart in some way, so that you can get one without getting the other. Either in the context of an application which was traditionally oriented towards finding things, but or an application which is search, and an application which is traditionally oriented towards not finding things but giving you answers, which is like these chat AI apps, right? But they're starting merging, right, in this obvious way. And then there's some other classic categories I haven't even talked about, which are not oriented on all towards information finding, which is make me a summary of what happened in the working group in the style of a Metallica song, and put my face on Captain America, and these are not even remotely information finding applications. I think we're not going to deal with this eventually, but I feel like there's maybe a different smell than this. I think what's difficult here is unfortunately that trying to draw the line between what's happening between my information retrieval and my information learning, not really a line that makes it sustainable. And unfortunately, I think the consequence of that obviously is disintermediation. The original place to generate the information. So I don't know what to do with any of that, but I was trying. That's what I was trying to make sense of.
Max.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. I would like to push back on one of the things that was said. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting exactly who said it, but along the lines of allowing publishers to express a full opt-out or a default opt-out would stymie innovation is an argument that I think we've heard a lot in the past, and I really don't believe holds that much water. Technological innovation is important, of course, and I'm all for it. But saying that there is a option for people to express a preference against broader use cases that we may not have thought of doesn't mean that that can't be changed. I mean, there's all sorts of examples where if you want to use content, you can pay for it. And if you can pay for it for innovation's sake, well, then that's probably a good idea. And it's not like putting a preference out there removes it from the world. I'd also point out that a lot of innovation happens on academic sets, which are easily available. And allowing people to have preferences doesn't mean that the entire internet disappears. So I really want to push back on this idea that having more stringent options would somehow stop innovation from happening in the technological sphere.
Okay, Leonard.
Yeah, since Bradley isn't here, I thought I would just also, and it was a related conversation in chat. It's worth noting that one of the reasons that Bradley put up his document specifically talking about substitutive is, and this is addressed there, is that the substitutive work is not just about reducing clicks, because we also wanted to talk about, and it's covered here in this document, the scenario whereby the user is performing local search. In other words, they've downloaded the document or documents or imagery or whatever onto their device, and they're performing a device or local search. So they've already acquired the assets. This is the thing right there, the lawfully acquired digital asset scenario. So in that case, it's not as you don't need the links per se. You've already acquired the asset. You've gone through that, but you want to perform the search, ask the questions, get the summaries, etc. And so I just wanted to point out this. We talk about search. It's not only about wide web search. It can also be other scenarios as well. And this is one of the things covered here in substitutive.
Thanks, Leonard. Paul.
I think it would benefit us if we were to go more closely to the text of the proposed categories. What I'm hearing a lot is like different opinions on how expressing something may or may not produce certain outcomes, which are, like, I think, if we're honest, for all of us, predictions that are largely influenced from where we are in this debate. I think, again, what has been stable throughout this group is that we had the impression that on the call it inference side, so after the models have been trained and fine-tuned, so the model deployment part, there's generally broadly there's one thing that people are more likely to want to allow, and one which is where this search category in our draft is, and one thing that people are more like that many rights holders in the current situation seem to have incentives to disallow. That's the sort of originally inference, then use, maybe substitution category, right? Like both of them are essentially, as Aaron has shown, like applications of the exact same technology displayed in different ways. Also, like, I think a lot of the arguments that have been made in chat that sort of like we cannot guarantee, like whatever, like the categories that we define are not here to guarantee any desired outcomes. We cannot will traffic into existence or sort of like make it bend it some other way. If people prefer summaries, then they prefer summaries, and then people who will express preferences against that will probably notice that and maybe learn and change their preferences. The thing here is that preferences, I think, can be like what we're trying to build is something, a system in which preferences can be relatively easily changed. And sort of like if we're not on the training side, like that has a relatively immediate impact of things. So I think we really sort of like need to go and sort of like work on text. And the main thing is that there is wherever there's a clear division between the two things, that these categories do not overlap, because like they are essentially like the two dials that people have expressed the need to work with, and they can dial one up and dial the other one down. And sort of in the end, like this will lead to some new equilibrium, how content is, and it will hopefully also lead to some new sort of equilibrium that is satisfactory to all entities in the market, right? And but we just did like, we need both of them because people want to make a decision, and so let's work on the text.
It's hard to follow on from the like, let's work on the text. But one thing I'm concerned about is we seem to be talking a whole bunch about allowing people to express their preference from the site they're part, but very little about what's actually best for the user, right? And when I'm saying the user, I'm not meaning the person who's publishing the stuff. I'm meaning people actually consuming it on the internet. Maria had the example of like with categories, maybe you don't get quite this many clicks. You don't have somebody click on a page and be like, that's not useful, and go back. What you do have is somebody gets to the page they care about. They click on the page and now it's actually the right page and useful to them. Like, I think we should be keeping in mind that what we build here is not just going to change the publisher ecosystem, but also is the internet still useful for users? Can they get the content they want? Wow, soapbox. Yours.
Yeah, I like the prompt to work on text. So starting with the text that we have on the screen right now, I have to say I think it's contradictory for the example that Aaron gave. So the example that Aaron gave, there was a link to a CNN article. The summary, I think if I remember correctly, it's not on the screen anymore. It was something like these links will cover basics of bird watching, including things like identifying the birds. So the CNN article could be about the different ways to identify birds, such as color, call, whatever, or it could be about finding groups to go bird watching with. But the summary doesn't tell you which one of those it is. It just says this CNN article falls into that category. So I would say it's definitely meeting the definition of this category that we have on the screen right now, sentence number 1, because it does use the assets as an input to the AI model. It does result in an output which incorporates, summarizes, aggregates, or reproduces the assets, because it, at the very least, aggregates it. So in that sense, if somebody had said AI substitutive use category set to no, what Aaron was showing would not be allowed. However, if you look at the third paragraph here, it says this category is distinct from search because unlike search, it covers uses that describe outputs that replace, reduce the utility of, or make the source asset redundant, which Aaron's example is not doing. So I don't think this text, as it is right now, is particularly helpful because it claims to achieve a certain result, but then this test case shows it doesn't achieve that result. If we go back to Krishna's text, if I understood your explanation correctly, it's kind of the same. If you say display text no, you would not be allowed to use it. So where I think this is a little bit better is because you also have display text length. So it would require a little bit of getting used to from the side of CNN in this case, because CNN would have to be aware, okay, if I do display text no, I would not be included in this particular type of search experience. And that is a choice that the publisher can make. So it's not possible, I guess, to just say I want to be excluded from all AI summary, but I want to be included in all search, because some search does require AI summary, but at least I think this text is a bit better at achieving nuance because the publisher would be able to say display text length, something very short, like 20 characters, which would allow, I guess, Google in this case to find out that the article is about identifying birds and would be able to show that in the summary. But I think this text is a better starting point, but it would need some work because it's not very clear for somebody reading this that this is actually how it would function in practice. So I think, yeah, if we were gonna work on text for this, I think the display text and display text length is better, but maybe we can try to improve it to actually make it clear to somebody reading this that this is how it would work.
Hi, just 2 points I want to make. First one's more of a statement, the second one's a question. First is about the substitution category. I think we need it. I think we need to refine the text. I want to push back on this idea of just about reducing clicks. I get it. People want answers. Sure, now they can get them. They no longer need to go to the source in a lot of cases. I think there's a difference between what's best for the user and what the user wants. Those aren't always the same thing. What's useful? That question. What's good for people? I think it's more complicated than just checking the temperature. I worry about the integrity of the response. Is it true? Is it accurate? Is the original content misrepresented? Especially for things like, your money or life queries, things that really matter coming from scientific publishing. And also teaching people to accept answers out of the box, not think critically about anything. And I think that's a little bit dangerous. The second point was a question about Chris's, the display text max length. You said it wouldn't use more than the max length to generate the summary. But I'm wondering which part of the document, it's a long document, which part of the document is it using to generate things? Okay, all right, great, thanks.
Daniel. Mike down there, Ecker.
Oh, there. Probably. Oh, sorry.
No, not for you.
Okay, good. Okay, yeah, it's like,
You can switch to the other document that substitute is available. As we switch to that substitute use category, I want to make sure I get this right on the language before I ask. It's either a smart or dumb question. Yeah. So I guess my question for this one, and I think this applies to some of the other drafts too, but specifically in what we were talking about how it's distinct from search. In Aaron's example, if you were to analyze a series of links and decide which ones to include or not include, ones that it analyzes and decides to not include because it only has a limited space or they're below the bar, is that going to get covered by this substituted use case in such a way that would prevent the feature from existing?
Got Krishna next.
So first to answer the question that was raised regarding display text length. Display text length as is currently written, it's any 50 characters limited, but as part of attachment, we could deal with specific portions if needed. We didn't address that quite a bit. And I also get the feedback about, hey, we need more clarity around the language that is in the document. I get that because the way we envision it addresses very specific problems that are being brought up. My question, as I read the AI substitutive use category, is does it preclude using a document as input for relevance or ranking?
You mean as a reference document, Krishna?
Yeah, so the wording is as input to a trained AI model as opposed to training the model. All relevance algorithms right now are trained models. So does it preclude using a document to even figure out whether it's relevant or not and then to rank it?
I think it could be. I think it goes further. Right?
Because ranking isn't reproducing the isn't reproducing the assets. It's not substituted. It's just a ranking.
So in this case, am I hearing you right that the reproduction is what the problem is, which is actually some sort of an output or a display?
Yes.
Yes, which is why we do the term substitutive, correct.
Okay, that helps me a little bit because in this case, I think substitutive is a very broad term and limiting it would be critical because obviously there are certain effects that are not intended over here. So I get that now. Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, I think I want to pick up on that and maybe push a little more on this, like a point I think I've tried to make a few times, which is this seems to me to be this and a bunch of the definitions I've seen seem to be like really kind of anchored to a very specific model of how like AI systems work, which is that they are pre-trained and then there's a context that gets fitted in them, and those are a sharp distinction. And that whereas the way things are now, but it may not be the way things are in the future. And if you think about how like you know. Like I read a lot of research reports, right? And like I have there's been stuff in my head by reading all that data, and then I write things down, and I like go looking for like citations to support the things that I already knew, and like I pick out some paper more or less at random to say, you know, to like support the thing I already knew, right? And what I don't do is like feed them into back in some context thing. And so like you want to be like if I like took back when like LLMs were very fresh, there were a lot of like concerns about like a more or less trained model, and it would more or less reproduce some piece of code that like is fed into it, right? And people didn't like that, and they were sad about that, even though it was not like the model did not like rag the piece of code and show it back in. It just was like stuff. It was just stuff in the model like somehow. And so like I guess I think like maybe the people who are like real experts on how these models work will tell me this is going to be the case in the future, forever in the future. But like it just seems to me like you should be just as upset if if someone says like, give me like the contents of the song, and what I do is I like pull them out of the model and hand them to you, as if I go and download it and I hand it to you, but it's exactly the same text. You should be equally upset. And so, so drawing this distinction here that sort of says like, it's substitutive if you download off the internet and like fed it in the context and reproduced it, but it's not substitutive if it came out of the model, which is like quite clearly says on the first sentence. I just think it's an odd distinction to draw. So like, it seems like the principle is that like you asked for something and you would, and like, again, the principle is difficult, but the principle in theory is you would have previously gone and found the thing and wanted the thing, but instead I gave you something and then you can go and find the thing. That's the thing that's objectionable, right? You would have previously gone and read this paper, but instead what I gave you a summary, you read the paper. Or you would previously go on this website and looked at the restaurant reviews, but instead I just told you which restaurant reviews to go to. And it seems to me that that's the case regardless of how that the internals of how that thing was generated.
So, Felix, go ahead. We're gonna move to lunch soon.
Yeah, Eric, I don't think this is, it says it's green, but it's not. I don't think this is such a huge problem. Like, if you look at this from the perspective of the publisher of the song, let's say, there is the no training category that I think most of us have agreed upon. If they don't want to be included in the model itself, they just say no to that. The problem that we're facing now with kind of RAG style scenarios is even if I have said no to training, and even if I'm not in the training data set, RAG brings me back in. And that's why there is a need for this additional category. So if you don't want to be included at all, you just say no to both. But I don't think this is like a fundamental design flaw that from the perspective of the user, it doesn't really make a difference whether something was taken from the model versus from an asset that was found online.
Let me see if I can restate what you just said. Or maybe in my way, which is that what the user didn't want was the model split the song back out to somebody, and so, but if they just say no training, that doesn't guarantee it will be split back out because it's going to rag it, right? So the rag is a fix for the fact that the training is sufficiently broad, right? So I don't have a problem with that. I think that's totally reasonable, but I guess my claim would have been that if we had a thing that captured the notion that these were what was the song being spit out, then we wouldn't need to make this distinction. And I guess I would point out that like it isn't that the case that like these models do have some information and like they have to be totally guardrails, not just spitting it back out when you ask for it. Like you say give me the song and it doesn't necessarily go download it. It just says like sorry, I refuse to like spit out the whole song because I'm not allowed to by like copyright, right? So I think, but now I understand that what you're trying to accomplish. I think that I agree that if with these category sets that we do need one.
Okay. There we go. So it's almost noon. I think what we want to do now is take a slightly longer lunch to give people a little more time to talk. So let's go till 1 p.m. local time. Please have some chats over that, and we'll come back after that and continue the discussion. Remote folks, remember that the afternoon session has a different link for data tracker, for me.gov. So please remember that when you dial back in. So 1 p.m., just a little over now. Elliot?
Yeah, just remind, I won't be taking notes in the afternoon. I hope
We
you
will
can,
find you a stride, and thank you for your service.
Thank you. Okay, see you now.
Bye. Okay, 1 hour.